In a judgment handed down on Friday by the Constitutional Court, late Sunday newspaper journalist Jon Qwelane's column about gays and lesbians was found to be harmful. However, Justice Steven Majiedt declared parts of the Equality Act unconstitutional because of its vagueness and limiting of the Constitution. To discuss these developments, we are joined by activist and founding director of Access Chapter 2, Steve Letsike. Steve, a very good morning. Thank you for speaking to us. Relief or joy for you at this ruling?
Thank you, and really good morning to your viewers.
Are you relieved? Are you happy at this ruling?
Look, we are happy because, there's a confirmation of, the rule of law in the country. Although it has taken 13 years, sometimes we do believe such exercises are needed. However, it shouldn't really be taking us this long to affirm a national legislation to prevent and prohibit unfair discrimination. And I think, the Jon Qwelane matter, which has taken us this long, has proven that, it was a wrongful act and it was a promotion of any kind of propaganda that would incite harm.
Now, when we look at what Jon Qwelane said so many years ago, excuse me, do you suspect that it speaks to a lot of the way South Africans feel or think? And I bring this into the context of the number of hate crimes that we have seen in the last couple of months.
Look, I think there are a couple of things to consider based on what you're asking. One is that a lot of South Africa who are homophobic, transphobic, have total disregard and respect of the rule of law. Secondly, it's the learnings, and the contributions of colonial legacy, that has taught and that has actually perpetrated, a continuation of conversion practices within society. So the history of prejudice is embedded within society, which needs to be corrected, in a very radical manner. I mean, we have a history that, have continuously disregarded and oppressed, communities and society. And it's things that we need to actually correct. So we've seen this expression in expressing inequality, and especially where there's a systematic nature. So indeed, parts of society may be feeling that way, may be taught that way, but it doesn't make it right in any way.
Absolutely not. Now, I'll stand to be guided, but I'd like to liken homophobic behavior a little bit to racism in many parts, in that we talk, we speak out against it, but it still exists. It continues to manifest in many areas. Over the world, there are huge campaigns to stamp out racism. Now, you talk about radicalism in terms of teaching for acceptance. How, in your mind, would this play out?
Look, I think there's a serious need. First, when we speak about transforming our society, transforming society takes a number of elements. It speaks about the institution, it speaks about the legislation framework that we have, but it also speaks about behavior, because you have to change behavior, that carries systematic inequalities, over time. Now, how it also plays out. First, you need to enforce the rule of law. You cannot have a country that does not enforce rule of law. And I think the affirmation by the Constitutional Court confirms why the rule of law and the judiciary system is quite important. Secondly, you also cannot have parliament that takes 2 decades, to discuss hate crime legislation and hate speech. Now, you have mentioned what is important. Now, South Africans have a history where black people were oppressed. South Africa has a history, and of course globally, where women have been oppressed. I mean, why in 1956 women marched in the street seeking gender equality? It's because of patriarchy, it's because of misogyny that exists. And even now, even when we have passed the Constitution in 1996, we still are seeing that even elements of community here in the case of LGBTI people, experience violence, experience hatred on the basis of their sexual orientation and gender identity. Now, you can speak about teaching, but if you don't change behavior, if you don't address the in-depth of toxic society, we are not going to get to a point where human dignity, where equality, where freedom is expressed by all. But I think the rule of law, where unjust system, unjust behavior can be accounted for. You can't have people in the departments of government being homophobic and transphobic. You must have consequence management. You can't have society that continues to spread hate or continues to violate other people's rights. That must be a rule of law. That's how you actually get society to also change and understand what is right and what is wrong. I think ultimately some of it goes to what happens in school, what happens in health service, what happens in the workplace, but also what happens in community. We are an unjust society, but it cannot be something that must continue. Our attitude, our practice, our social structures cannot continue to undermine the aspiration of our own constitutional democracy.
Now, have we made any progress on answers for you living as a gay individual? Let's go back 10 years. Let's go back 15 years, right? Let's go back to the journey that you've walked. Has there been progress in the rights of gay people in South Africa?
Look, it's been 27 years where, democracy was felt, where we've seen progressive redress in the conditions that lies within our own constitution. You've seen an enactment of various legislation pieces. You talk about employment equity, you speak about sex status changing, you speak about a Civil Union Act, you speak about many other legislative programs. But you've also seen various pockets of excellence of programs that have been developed within government, within society. You've seen a rise of allies standing up and speaking out. So there has been pockets of progress that we've seen in the country, but also we've seen visibility of LGBTI people coming out, speaking out, being who they are, being proud and being resilient in their everyday life. The progress is there in South Africa. We must not deny it. The challenge that we have, it's a continuation of hatred that goes unaccounted for. It's also about the challenge where LGBTI people fear living in with their families, because you do have families who remain homophobic, who remain transphobic, and who actually start kicking out their own children in their homes. Now, when you kick out your children, and this is a societal issue, when you kick out your child from your house, where should they go? This is your child. Have you actually done enough as a parent or as a guardian to actually empower yourself, even if you've been taught otherwise? Empower yourself and actually first appreciate your child as your child besides who they love or who they are.
Steve, allow me to interject. I think it's an important aspect because I was speaking to a colleague only recently, and she was talking about how when her cousin came out, he came out at dinner with the parents, and there was absolute shock, mayhem, pandemonium. What was the process like for you when you came out? Were your parents accepting? How did you move on? How do you deal with your friends and family?
Right. So I lost my parents when I was very little. So I grew up with my grandparents. And I can tell you that I didn't have to come out, in a way that becomes a hi grandma, hi grandpa, I'm lesbian. In fact, my aunt is the one that, informed me. I didn't even know the word lesbian then. However, when my grandmother found out that I was lesbian, I mean, she's a Christian. And she was a mamfundisi in her own church, where, the teaching of church that says that, it's a sin. And I'm just putting it as how quite religious communities put it. It took my grandmother a bit of time. However, she has never kicked me out because I'm lesbian. The difficulty of her dealing with it had to lead, to getting people pray for me and so forth, which is an act of conversion practice anyway. However, what happens in society, and I've had homophobic neighbors, I've had homophobic teachers, one of those. However, I think resilience and your own strength built with your own kind of support, including even with my own grandmother. I mean, she may have taken time, but she came around and she did say to me, I love you as my grandchild. We'd never then spoken about my own sexual orientation. And I think that's a very important thing. But the support structure, whether it's your siblings, whether it's your aunt, uncle who come and say, Mama, leave her, she's our child. And then you start empowering yourself. And I think that's a very important thing. And I think that's the kind of support that is the foundation where other LGBTI people do not have. And I think it's a critical point about whether churches at some point will transform, whether cultural structures will do. Because even with the foundation that I've received, it took a lot. Even today, it still takes a lot within our own families and relatives, where they have to actually start transforming their own thing. I don't want to be accepted, and I never use the word acceptance because I don't accept, that I was here for a wrong reason. And even with heterosexual, people should never go around seeking acceptance or people coming out to be accepted. It is wrong. It must never be that way. We must be able to live in a land and in our own coexisting, acknowledging that we are all different and we are here for a purpose that is beyond human beings.
Steve, fabulous speaking to you this morning. Thank you so much for your time.